So what we're going to be focusing on today is understanding the practices and preparations of Egyptian death and the afterlife. We've talked about this already. So we have seen images of power coming from the Great Pyramids of Giza. And now we're going to focus on the the New Kingdom focus on death and afterlife. Okay, so we know some things already, but what do we know about Tutankhamun? What do we know about Tutankhamun? We ended on Friday with a video about him. What kind of a pharaoh was he? What was he like? Go ahead, chit chat with the people sitting next to you. Okay, what was he like? What was Tutankhamun like? Say it out loud. Yes, Angie. Right, so he was a child pharaoh. He really was controlled by advisors and priests. Was he a major pharaoh? No. Honestly, the reason we know him so well is because he had one of the best preserved and most elaborate tombs. It had not been raided by tomb robbers. And so that's why he's famous, right? Not because he was a great pharaoh, but because we have his stuff. So we think he's the son of Akhenaten, right? So the pharaoh from the Amarna period. Excuse me, Amarna period. I'm always pronouncing it wrong. So the Amarna period, right? We think he is son of Akhenaten and Akhenaten's sister, too, right? Notice it's not Nefertiti. We don't think it's Nefertiti's son. So remember, during the Amarna period, they moved the capital city, right? And they moved the city of worship from Thebes to Amarna, right? It's Aten, right? The new sun king. And so he became king at the age between 6 and 9. So really, really young, really, really young. And so he married his half sister from his father and his wife, Nefertiti, right? So once again, remember how we said they often married each other to keep the bloodlines together, to kind of consolidate power. And what happened during the reign of Tutankhamun is they moved the religious center back to Thebes from Akhenaten, right? So the capital city from now what we know as a Tel Amar, right? They moved it back, right, to the traditional place of power. And so this young pharaoh, he could be easily manipulated. He was a child. So they basically undid everything from his father. Okay. The interesting thing is we will see a few elements of detail from the Amarna period in the later works, especially of the work of Tutankhamun's burial. Okay. And so he was the 12th king of the 18th dynasty. I don't think that's exceptionally, like important that you have to memorize all of that. But we see a return to more traditional methods of worship, more traditional art forms, but we'll see some elements of it remain. And then he died around age 18. We're not exactly sure about why. There's a bunch of different ideas. They've done a lot of studying of his skull and studies of his bones and studies of obviously his mummy to try to decide what had happened to him. There was evidence he probably had gotten in an accident, maybe from a chariot, and like broke some bones. There's also evidence that there's some genetic disorders. Being all that intermarriage, he might have not been the healthiest to begin with. And so that compounded on getting hurt could have led to his death. Okay, so you have a practice essay. Tomorrow, you will have an identification essay. And that is why we're practicing it today, okay? So you're gonna need to know and memorize some things about the identification. Where can you find the identification in your note takers? In the middle, right? So I printed out the name of it for you, right? And then you're gonna put in all that information like what it's made out of, the time period, the location, okay? How many things do you want to memorize? Oh, look, I actually wrote it up there. Try to memorize at least 3 so that if you forget one, you have your 2, because AP will not give you credit if you just label 1. Okay, just label 1. So you have to identify first. Usually for identification, they give you 1 point. 1 point for identification. Then what you want to do is answer the following questions. Where was this coffin found? Why was the site chosen? And then, right, what is the specific visual evidence by examining this artwork? So by using specific evidence, examine how this work is part of a tradition of pharaonic burials. Okay, we have looked at many images of pharaohs. Okay, I'm going to give you a little hint here. So when you look at this, how do I know he is a pharaoh, right? And how does this reflect the beliefs and the tradition of burial practices by the Egyptians? Okay, I'm going to give you time to do this. Okay, so 15 minutes. Go ahead and begin. We only have 2 images today, so I'll give you plenty of time for that. Feel free to use your notes for this. You do not have to do it by itself. You will obviously on the quiz, so you can use your note takers. I know it's kind of hard on a Monday. You can go to Smart History if you like. There is an article on the innermost tombs that probably has some information that you can use. Hey Siri, set a timer for 15 minutes. Okay, that was 15 minutes. So like I said, I really like for you to get a feel for what that time period looks like. When you take an AP test, all of them are kind of different about how they go about giving you your essays. We have 2 hours of essays, and they basically give you a big chunk of time to do all of them, which kind of hurts. Like they used to like say 15 minutes and 15 minutes so you could move on to the next. But they know some of you finished really early and you might want to move on to the next one. And so they made it open-ended, but you basically want to try to get it done in 15 minutes so that you have plenty of time to answer all the others. And so first part was identification. What are going to be the easy things to memorize here? What are going to be the easier things to memorize? What do you think? Yeah. The name, the place, what else? The material, definitely. I think dates and dynasties are probably the hardest thing. But if you know New Kingdom, that's a pretty easy thing to memorize too, because we only have artworks from Old Kingdom, New Kingdom for Egypt. Right? When it comes to the Near East, knowing if it's Sumerian or Assyrian or Babylonian is going to be the thing that's easier to remember rather than the specific date. And then when it comes to materials, I know that if you don't put in every last bit of this, they are going to give you credit. So if you speak about it being gold right? They're probably going to give you credit. If you add and embellish about enamel and semi-precious stones, they'll give you credit too. So just know that if you miss something about the material, as long as you have the main ones, they're going to give you credit, okay? They're going to give you credit. And in the whole scheme of things, when we think about the 8 different kinds of essay questions, only twice do they ask for identification. So you might get some of it in multiple choice, which is always a little easier, right, to know about. But it really 2 out of the 8 essays ask you to memorize. So if you don't memorize, it's not the end of the world, right, when it comes to your overall performance on the test. However, I don't want it to be a shock to you that when you do have that kind, so I do want to practice and give you those types of questions. Okay, so where was this coffin found and why was the site chosen? Who found that information? Where was it found and why was the site chosen? Yes. It's in the Valley of the Kings. Why was his coffin placed in the Valley of the Kings? Nicole. Okay, so I'm going to say a little louder in case the recording didn't pick it up, but they're placed in the Valley of the Kings because A, he's a pharaoh, right? So he would be placed with all the other pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. And unlike when we were at Giza, right, they moved it to the south because of those rocky cliffs that you were mentioning. There's a bunch of rocky cliffs, and the pyramids are basically big neon signs saying, here's all the riches and gold and objects that you could possibly want to steal. Come here and take our stuff, right? But they wanted to prepare. So remember, these pharaohs are still building their tombs during their reign, during their lifetime. And so they are going to the Valley of the Kings, and they're going into these cliffs, and they're building their tombs. Okay, they're building their tombs. Now, did grave robbers know that this is where it is? Yes, but they were able to trick them a little bit more and make extra shafts and things like that in the cliffside. And so it was a little bit more protected than just having it out somewhere else. Okay. And then you had mentioned again about how it being on the west side of the Nile. So just like at Giza, right? That is the symbol of the end of day, right? Because the sun sets on the west. Very good. So, oh my goodness, we got it all, or we looked at the presentation. That's great. So that is from the rubric, right? That is from the rubric. Okay, so where was it found? So here's some contextual images. You probably saw some of these on the Smart History. So this is what those rocky cliffs look like. This is what those different shafts start looking like once they started excavating into the cliff sides. And so they created some shafts that went into the earth in the Egyptian time, and then archaeologists excavated those areas, right? And so when we think about that last part of the question, so using specific visual evidence, examine how this work is a part of the traditions of pharaonic burial. There's actually a number of things that you could have written, okay? Let's just start with these contextual photos that I have for you of Tutankhamun's burial. What stands out to you here? Do you actually see his tomb? Do you see his burial spot? What is this stuff? Yeah. Right, so that's all his favorite stuff. He's got like a cheetah throne here. He's got a chariot. He's got little coffins of birds and cats and alligators and all kinds of things over here. He's got chests with drawers. He's probably got jewels. He's probably got clothing. He probably has bedding. Like he probably has everything he could possibly need in the afterlife. Why? Why did they prepare for the afterlife? What was that belief that we're talking about? What was it, the necessity to have all this stuff? Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Their life just continues into the afterlife. They just need this stuff, right? So it's not like they think that they go to heaven and it's a completely different place. They just continue for all days end, right? And they just need the stuff. Everything they would enjoy on earth, they would enjoy in the afterlife, and they would continue to reign, right? So there was 143 objects found in his burial spot, and that would be all the things that his body and his ka would need, right? So here is a description, visually description of all of that stuff. This video, you have to sign in to get to, so I'm going to skip it, but it just kind of goes over the importance of the Valley of the Kings and why they chose that location. Most of that stuff we already covered, okay? So when we got to his tomb, he actually had 3 coffins and a death mask. So in our book, it has his death mask. So this is the death mask, and then this is his mummified body. So this white part here was how he was wrapped, but he had this really cool death mask. And so there's a series of coffins. And why did they use gold? Gold was the symbol of eternity. And they not only used it to make the coffin, because you know that that's the medium for the sarcophagus for the coffin, but also they did it in the walls, right, to represent that belief in eternity. Okay, so here's Howard Carter. He's the British archaeologist who helped discover it. And so here you can see him opening up one part of it, and then so this is like an outer sarcophagus. This is one of the inner sarcophagus. And the reason I know is that that's not his feet wrapped up, right? Okay. So this is what it looks like today when you go to visit it, I think at the British Museum. You can see that they basically had like the walls of his tomb were all images of him and his life, typical sort of power imagery. And then here we have other images that kind of talk about burial, like our Book of Hours, our Book of the Dead, okay? And so here's the outermost coffin. Look at all that gold, right? Symbols of power, right? And then looking at the sarcophagus on the outside, this is your picture is a frontal, and it's a little blurry, and it's not so great. So here's a slightly better. What are some of the traditional power imagery that we see? Because part of it too was talking about pharaonic burial. How do I know this is a pharaoh? What are the telltale signs? Go ahead, Christina. The headdress, he's got the Nemes headdress on, and right in the center of it, we have a cobra. Anything else? Tell me he's a king? Yeah. He has a crook and a flail, right? And there's hieroglyphics on it as well, right? And so you can really see all those different emblems of power. Actually, I take this wrong. This is one of the innermost. This is the one that's on the 250, right? It also has symbols of Horus. Horus often accompanied you into the afterlife, kind of as a protector. We'll see that as well. And so you see his wings kind of wrapping around the body. The crook and the flail are symbols of Osiris. And we'll see that in the Book of the Dead. Right? So the headdress is a symbol of Upper and Lower Egypt with cobra and falcon. He also has kind of idealized features of a king, right? He was a very young king, but still kind of showed very stoic, very traditional, very cool, calm, and collected. Right? So function, right? I think probably you know, like just like adding to the note takers and not talking necessarily about the question anymore on the essay. The function of it is that it's obviously his final resting place, but it also has the function of protecting his body, right? Because he's got those 3 coffins, a headdress, and he's mummified. So his body is really protected, right? When we look at the style of it, right? When we look at the style of it, we have back all of those markers of power, very formal, very stoic, very calm. But when I also look at it, I see a little bit of a nod to the Armana period. This is his death mask, or the final, like, this is like the face mask that goes over his sarcophagus. And you'll notice that he has thicker lips that kind of denote the Nubian element of his heritage. Remember, Akhenaten's mother was Nubian, and so he has like thicker lips. So we see a little bit of portraiture, but we don't necessarily see direct representation, right? Still kind of idealized. He still has his beard. I want to make sure, yeah, innermost one also has the beard for those emblems of pharaonic power. Where Tim being young, he probably doesn't have a beard, but he needs a beard because that's what pharaohs have, right? So they would wear fake ones. Okay, this is what it looked like when Carter found it. So you can see it's been cleaned up a lot. As you're kind of jotting down your notes, this fell off. And when they were cleaning it later, they noticed that it had fallen off and someone had glued it in place, like a worker at the British Museum. That's funny. Okay, so all this gold inside the tomb symbolized power. Traditional images of him protecting and serving the people. Okay, so that's basically the breakup on the essay question. And so elaborating with visual evidence, you want to make sure that you have more than one. Those, when they say evidence, normally they're asking for at least two things. So try to add as much as you can. Okay, our last piece is the Last Judgement of HU-NEFER, or HU-NEFER. And this is from his tomb. This is a page from the Book of the Dead. So what's the function of a Book of the Dead? Does anyone know? Just like in the walls of Tutankhamun's burial, the dead needed directions on how to get to the afterlife. Now, in the Old Kingdom, it wasn't necessarily such a big deal. It was pretty much believed that everyone would, but by the New Kingdom, people they started to decide that you had to do good works on earth to be able to continue to live on and on and on, right? Very similar to some of the early beliefs in Christianity, which of course would make sense considering location and Christianity's connection with the Jews and with being in Egypt for a time, right? So this is going to be directions on how to get into the afterlife. And so this is another page from it. You can see that this page is about what? What are they doing? They're preparing the body. That is mummification rituals. So there's directions on mummification rituals, right? And so we don't have a lot of time to sketch this, but what we're going to do is just take it section by section. Okay, so what's going on in this section and who are the characters? Can you find HU-NEFER? Where is he? He's the one on the left. So he's got his hand held by Anubis. So Anubis is the jackal. And so what he's basically doing is taking HU-NEFER to the scales. And so there is this belief that if you were truly good, that if your heart was weighed against the feather of Mot, remember Mot is truth, right? So here is the feather of Mot, and then there's a personification of Mot here too. You can see the headdress and then the feather above it. So we have a scale, right? And so if your heart is lighter than a feather, then you will get to go on to the afterlife, right? So they have a little Koptic jar here with mummification. They'd often put your internal organs in little jars. Got a jar there, and so his heart is there. And so Anubis is again measuring his heart. This is an example of a continual narration where we see characters repeated over and over again to tell a story. Okay, so we have the jackal-headed Anubis weighing the heart, and then we have Amet. Amet is kind of like an alligator / lion god. And he would be the god that if that part was too heavy and not pure enough to move on, he would gobble it up and eat it. And so then he would be at the end and he would never make it to the afterlife, right? So that's what he's doing there, okay? And then we have Thoth, who it has this ibis head. He's there recording the fact that HU-NEFER may pass on into the afterlife, right? So this is kind of like section by section for you, okay? So then we have the last section. So this is the part on the right. And we have HU-NEFER again. And then we have Horus. So Horus is the falcon. And you can see him in his composite form of falcon head and human body. And what does he have in his hand? What is that? We saw that on Akhenaten's little tablet. An Ankh. And an Ankh is a symbol of life. And so he's being presented to the god of death. So Osiris, right? Osiris is there. And so he's being presented to the god of Osiris. He is blue. And so he's presented that he can move on. And so here supporting our god of death, Osiris, is Isis and Nephthys, which is the wife and the sister. So Horus is presenting, right, HU-NEFER, but then we also have a personification of Horus right here. This is another way he's often represented. You can see he's back to bird form, and then there's this eye. We call that the eye of Osiris, and he is holding in his talons a feather, right? So that's the feather of Ma'at again, that symbol of truth. So it is true, HU-NEFER is worthy to move on to the afterlife. Right? At the very top of the panel, we have HU-NEFER again, and he's sitting in front of the 9 gods of Hephaestus and the 5 personifications of life. Hephaestus is in Lower Egypt. It's very close to Giza, and it is where a lot of the pre-dynastic burial chambers are. So it would be kind of a location that was associated with death. Okay, so this entire thing is in a papyrus scroll. These things could be painted on walls, but often by the New Kingdom, they were placed in papyrus scrolls. They would be rolled up and they could either be set inside your coffin, right? Or they could have actually been placed between the layers of mummification because you wanted to make sure that you had your directions when you were moving on to the afterlife. Okay. So there is, in Smart History, there is an article on it that you are welcome to watch if you need to see that again. Another thing I failed to mention is all this hieroglyphics is, part of the content too. Notice that we have it in visual representation, but written, we would know exactly what was going on if we could understand hieroglyphics, right? I mean, we don't, but other people do. So personifications and
sorry for the interruption. We do have the SOS sessions going on today with some of our freshmen. Freshmen, for second hour, if you have Mr. Dykes, you'll be going to room 184. Ms. Hendrickson, you'll be going to the PE classroom, which is room 197 by the PE office. And Mr. Racy, second period, you'll be going to the dance room. So Mr. Dykes, second hour, you're going to 184. Ms. Hendrickson, second hour, go to 197 by the PE office. And Mr. Racy, second hour, you're going to the dance room. We'll have one more announcement at the end of the next period. Thank you.
Okay, now this is not in the test, but I wanted to show you some interiors of some of these tombs. As you're walking out Central, and you don't have to stay for this, but I wanted to show how beautiful these interiors would be. So, of course, we saw the burial chamber of Tutankhamun, full of gold, but what would a high official tomb look like? This is Nebamun, and so he's shown hunting because he enjoyed that in the afterlife. So notice how there is a sense of layered space here. He's in front of all these different water creatures, but once again, not a real depiction of space, but you get the idea, right? This is an aerial view of his garden, and I love the mixed perspective. Remember, Egyptian style is like, give me whatever visual information will make the most sense. So we have an aerial view of a pond with fish and ducks, and then a garden scene where it's almost like the trees are laying on its side so that you understand that there are trees, right? We have him surveying his field. You see him overseeing his workers. You see his cattle, so it shows his wealth. And then there's a feast on the inside. So there's images of dancers and a seated banquet. And so you get an idea of how realistic these images could be. Remember, common people were allowed to look more realistic, less stiff. And so here we have the dancers and the musicians, right? You can see a 3D animation of this on Smart History, but once again, it's not the 250. So I just wanted to show you that not only, it wasn't just the pharaohs who got to have really cool tunes. Okay. Tomorrow, if you have questions, feel free to email me. Probably stopping at 9 o'clock, will not respond back.